The Black Dahlia Murder, USA, 1947. Los Angeles, 1947. A city of lights, dreams, and Hollywood stars. But beneath the glamour, something darker was waiting. On the morning of January 15th, a woman's body was found in a vacant lot, cut in half, drained of blood, posed like a nightmare. Her name was Elizabeth Short, but the world would remember her forever as the Black Dahlia. This is Hey Spooky, and tonight, we're diving into one of the most brutal and haunting unsolved crimes in American history. Once you hear the details, you'll never look at old Hollywood the same way again. Chapter 1: A City of Shadows. Los Angeles in the 1940s was a city that lived in two worlds at once. On the surface, it was the shining beacon of American glamour. The Second World War had ended, soldiers were returning home, and the film industry was thriving. Hollywood's golden age was in full swing, with movie stars like Humphrey Bogart, Rita Hayworth, and Lauren Bacall dominating the silver screen. For many, Los Angeles seemed like the land of opportunity, a place where dreams could be forged under the glow of neon lights. But beneath the glitter and allure was another reality. The city was also a place of shadows, corruption, and violence. The Los Angeles Police Department, already under scrutiny for ties to organized crime and systemic corruption, struggled to keep order in a sprawling metropolis that was growing faster than it could control. Nightclubs and dance halls pulsed with music and alcohol, while behind the scenes, gambling rings, mobsters, and shady deals thrived. The veneer of Hollywood glamour barely covered the city's darker heart. This was the Los Angeles that Elizabeth Short entered in the mid-1940s, a young woman in search of something brighter than what life had so far given her. But before her story truly begins, it's important to understand the city she found herself in. A city both seductive and dangerous. A city growing too fast. By 1947, Los Angeles was a city in transition. Wartime industries had brought thousands of new residents, swelling its population past 2 million. Many of these newcomers, like Elizabeth Short, were young people chasing opportunity. They came with dreams of finding work in the booming entertainment industry or simply building a better life. But the city's growth came with cracks, housing shortages, rising crime rates, and a police force stretched thin. Certain districts had reputations that were hard to ignore. Hollywood glittered with movie theaters, casting agencies, and nightclubs, but only a few blocks away, poverty and crime were rampant. Skid Row teemed with vagrants, while South Central battled waves of gang-related violence. Los Angeles was a city divided, glamorous on the boulevard, dangerous in the alleyways. The shadows of crime and corruption. Crime was hardly new to Los Angeles. The 1930s and 40s had already earned the city a reputation for corruption and brutality. The LAPD was accused of working hand-in-hand with powerful mobsters and businessmen. Politicians turned a blind eye to illegal gambling and prostitution rings, many of which thrived in downtown hotels and back rooms of bars. Even the press played a role in shaping this dark reality. Newspapers such as the Los Angeles Examiner and the Los Angeles Times competed fiercely, often sensationalizing crimes to attract readers. Scandals, murders, and salacious stories were front-page material, and the more lurid the details, the better. In this environment, a shocking crime could become a media circus overnight. Hollywood's double life. Hollywood itself mirrored this split personality. On one hand, it was a dream factory, producing images of romance, beauty, and success. Stars were carefully packaged, their lives curated by studios that controlled their every move. The city was filled with glamour spots like the Macambo nightclub, the Brown Derby restaurant, and the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, places where movie stars mingled with hopeful newcomers. But on the other hand, Hollywood had its predators. Young women arrived daily, hoping to break into acting or modeling. Most ended up working as waitresses, secretaries, or shop clerks, while some found themselves drawn into more dangerous circles, unscrupulous men who promised connections but delivered only exploitation. For every aspiring starlet who made it big, countless others were left broken and forgotten. It was in this world of opportunity mixed with risk that Elizabeth Short, later known as the Black Dahlia, would live her final days. A city already haunted by crime. Even before Elizabeth's murder, Los Angeles had been no stranger to grisly crimes that captured headlines. The 1920s and 1930s had seen a string of unsolved murders, many tied to organized crime. In 1943, the Zoot Suit riots revealed deep racial tensions as servicemen clashed violently with young Mexican Americans in East LA. Police brutality was widespread, and scandals involving officers were common knowledge. When Elizabeth's body would eventually be found in January 1947, the city was already primed for hysteria. People were used to reading about crime in their morning paper, but the details of her case would shock them like nothing before. In a city where darkness often lurked just beneath the sunshine, the Black Dahlia case would become the perfect storm of violence, mystery, and media frenzy. Setting the stage. To understand the enduring fascination with the Black Dahlia murder, one must first understand this backdrop. Los Angeles was a city of contradictions, sunlight and shadows, glamour and decay, promise and betrayal. It was a city where dreams could come true, but where nightmares were just as likely. Elizabeth Short would walk through this landscape, sometimes blending into the crowd, sometimes standing out with her striking appearance. She was one of many young women who arrived in Los Angeles seeking hope, but the city she entered was not a safe place. It was a stage set perfectly for tragedy, waiting for a story that would echo for decades. And in January 1947, that story would arrive, etched forever into Los Angeles history and into America's collective memory. Chapter 2: The Life of Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth Short was not born in a mystery or violence. She began life in a quiet, modest setting, far from the Hollywood lights that would later consume her name. Yet her story, like the city she would one day inhabit, was marked by both hope and hardship. To understand how she became the infamous Black Dahlia, we need to first look at who Elizabeth truly was: a daughter, a dreamer, and a young woman searching for belonging. A childhood marked by loss. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924, in the Boston suburb of Hyde Park, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her early childhood seemed ordinary enough. Her father, Cleo, was an entrepreneur who built miniature golf courses, a booming business in the 1920s. For a time, the Short family lived in relative comfort. But the stock market crash of 1929 changed everything. The Great Depression destroyed countless businesses, and Cleo's golf enterprise collapsed. Facing financial ruin, Cleo abruptly abandoned his family in 1930, leaving his car near a bridge in Boston and vanishing. Many believed he had taken his own life. Phoebe was suddenly left to raise 5 daughters alone, scraping together a living as a bookkeeper and struggling to keep her family afloat. Elizabeth, known as Betty to some, grew up in this difficult environment. Without a father figure, and with her mother working constantly, she often felt the instability of her early years. Her relationship with her family was complicated. She loved her sisters, but she longed for something beyond the narrow world she grew up in. Fragile health and a dream of escape. Elizabeth was a striking child, but her health was fragile. She suffered from severe asthma and lung problems, leading doctors to recommend that she spend winters in warmer climates. Beginning in her teenage years, she would often live with relatives in Florida during the coldest months, escaping the harsh Massachusetts weather. These trips gave her glimpses of a broader world, fueling her imagination and her longing for something bigger than the life she knew. Even in her youth, Elizabeth was enamored with the movies. Like countless girls of her generation, she was captivated by the glamour of Hollywood stars. Actresses like Veronica Lake and Rita Hayworth embodied a kind of beauty and confidence she admired. Elizabeth wanted to be part of that world, not necessarily as a movie star, but as someone who could escape the confines of ordinary life and live surrounded by possibility. Her classmates remembered her as quiet but friendly, with a striking sense of style. She dyed her dark hair with henna for a more exotic look, wore fashionable dresses when she could afford them, and often seemed older than her years. Friends later recalled that she carried herself with elegance despite her modest means, always seeming to chase a vision of sophistication. A family secret, her father's return. In a strange twist, Elizabeth's father, Cleo Short, re-emerged in 1942. He had not died as many assumed, but instead had abandoned the family completely. moving to California to start a new life. Elizabeth, then 18, reconnected with him in a fragile attempt to build a relationship. He invited her to live with him in Vallejo, near San Francisco, offering her a chance to start fresh in California. But the reunion was short-lived. Cleo was strict and disapproving, criticizing Elizabeth for her habits and choices. Their relationship quickly soured, and Elizabeth moved out on her own. Yet that brief connection with California planted a seed. She had seen the West Coast, tasted its sunshine, and glimpsed the dream of Hollywood up close. Wartime years and romance. Like many young women of the early 1940s, Elizabeth's life was shaped by World War II. She drifted between jobs in restaurants, theaters, and military bases. Known for her beauty and charm, she often attracted the attention of servicemen. One romance in particular stood out: her relationship with Major Matthew Gordon, an Air Force officer. Elizabeth believed Gordon to be the great love of her life. While stationed in California and later in Florida, she told friends she was engaged to him, though evidence of a formal engagement remains uncertain. Tragically, Gordon died in a plane crash in 1945, shortly before the war ended. Elizabeth reportedly wore black for weeks in mourning, a foreshadowing of the Black Dahlia, moniker the press would later seize upon. Her love life afterward was complicated. She continued to date men, often military personnel or men with Hollywood connections, but struggled to find stability. To some, she seemed flirtatious or elusive. To others, she was simply a young woman searching for companionship in a world still reeling from war. A life on the move. By the mid-1940s, Elizabeth had become something of a drifter, moving frequently between cities: Los Angeles, San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Long Beach. She stayed with friends, boyfriends, or acquaintances, often moving on when money or opportunities dried up. She had ambitions of working in film, though not always as an actress. Some accounts suggest she wanted to be a model or work in Hollywood in any capacity, while others indicate she simply longed for a glamorous life. Regardless, she became known for her striking appearance: pale skin, dark wavy hair, and a wardrobe that emphasized her femininity. She wore carefully applied makeup and dressed as if she belonged on a movie set, even when her finances were precarious. But beneath this glamorous image was a young woman living on the edge. Elizabeth often had little money, sometimes went hungry, and relied on the kindness of others to survive. She was not the femme fatale the press later portrayed her to be. She was a struggling 22-year-old trying to make sense of a difficult life in an unforgiving city. The woman behind the myth. Elizabeth's short story has often been obscured by myth. The media of 1947 painted her in extremes, either as a party girl who consorted with dangerous men or as an innocent victim preyed upon by a cruel city. The truth was somewhere in between. She was ambitious but uncertain, stylish but often broke, charming but lonely. Friends remembered her as someone who dreamed big but seemed unsure of how to make those dreams real. She could be reserved and mysterious, yet she also craved attention and connection. By the end of 1946, Elizabeth was once again in Los Angeles, living in temporary arrangements, sometimes with roommates, sometimes in cheap hotels. She had no steady job, no stable home, and no clear path forward. But she had not given up. Like many young women of her time, she still believed in the possibility of something greater, perhaps even stardom. That hope would carry her into January 1947. But in the shadows of Los Angeles, her story was about to take a darker turn. Chapter 3: A Vanishing in Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles in early January 1947 was alive with contradictions. On one hand, neon lights glowed across Hollywood Boulevard, and jazz spilled from smoky nightclubs where servicemen returning from the war sought release. On the other, the city's underbelly was darker than ever. Organized crime, corrupt police officers, and predators who prowled among the hopeful. Elizabeth Short, 22 years old and restless, moved through this world like a ghost, always searching for a foothold but never quite finding it. She drifted from place to place, each move a desperate attempt to anchor herself in the unstable current of post-war Los Angeles. In the days before her disappearance, she seemed to slip further into the shadows, a vanishing act that would culminate in one of the most infamous unsolved murders in American history. Life in Los Angeles, January 1947. At the start of the new year, Elizabeth's life had already taken several difficult turns. She was living in Los Angeles, but had no permanent residence. Her suitcase was her constant companion, containing only a handful of clothes, photographs, and letters from men she had known. Friends later described her as always on the move, crashing at apartments, boarding houses, and hotels when she could find the money. Her last stable living arrangement had been with a friend named Dorothy French in San Diego. Dorothy's family had taken Elizabeth in out of kindness after finding her sleeping in a theater lobby. Elizabeth stayed for about a month, but by early January she had returned to Los Angeles, drawn again to the city that both tempted and betrayed her. She told acquaintances that she was looking for work, perhaps in film or modeling, but nothing materialized. She often relied on men she met, soldiers, businessmen, nightclub owners, to cover meals or provide temporary shelter. It was not unusual for women of her age and situation in 1940s LA, but it left her vulnerable to exploitation. The final sightings. The timeline of Elizabeth's last known days is frustratingly unclear, pieced together from witness statements, rumors, and contradictions. What is certain is that she was last seen alive on the evening of January 9, 1947. That night, Elizabeth was in the company of a man named Robert "Red" Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman. Manley had met her weeks earlier and had driven her around the city on several occasions. Though he insisted their relationship was platonic, he admitted he was attracted to her. On January 8th, he picked Elizabeth up in San Diego and brought her back to Los Angeles. They checked into the Cecil Hotel, a place notorious for its seedier clientele, and shared a room, though Manley later claimed Elizabeth slept in her own bed. The next morning, January 9th, he drove her to the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, where she said she was meeting her sister. Witnesses at the Biltmore confirmed that Elizabeth spent several hours in the lobby, waiting. No one ever saw her sister. Sometime after leaving the Biltmore, Elizabeth vanished. The mystery of her movements. From January 9th until January 15th, her whereabouts remain a chilling blank space. Did she meet someone that night who offered her shelter? Did she fall into the company of strangers who promised her opportunities? Or was she taken against her will, her disappearance carefully orchestrated by someone who already knew her vulnerabilities? Investigators later chased countless leads about her movements during those missing days. Some claimed to have seen her at bars or nightclubs, others at bus stops or walking alone on darkened streets. A few alleged sightings placed her with men, though none could be confirmed. The uncertainty only added to the sense of dread surrounding her final week. For her family, who had no idea she was even in danger, those days passed without alarm. For Elizabeth, they may have been days of mounting fear, or perhaps she never realized the danger she was in until it was too late. Elizabeth's struggles in perspective. The narrative that emerged after her death painted Elizabeth in contradictory ways. Some described her as a glamorous socialite, always chasing nightlife. Others insisted she was quiet, shy, and even reserved, often declining advances from men. The truth lies somewhere between. Elizabeth enjoyed being admired, but she was also a young woman desperately trying to survive. She often told men she was engaged, using the story of her late fiancé Matthew Gordon to discourage unwanted advances. She longed for security, for stability, and perhaps even marriage, but those hopes slipped further from her grasp as she drifted from place to place. By early January, she was physically fragile. She smoked frequently, struggled to eat regularly, and often appeared tired. Her glamorous appearance was partly a mask, a way of hiding the instability of her life. The last known trail. Robert Manley would later testify that when he left her at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th, she seemed calm, even cheerful. She was dressed stylishly in a black suit, her hair curled, her shoes polished. She carried her small black handbag. She had plans, or at least the appearance of plans. But after that night, Elizabeth Short ceased to exist in the eyes of the world. No family, no close friends, and no official records could account for where she went. For 6 days, she was alive somewhere in Los Angeles, a city of millions, yet entirely invisible. Those lost days are among the most haunting aspects of her story. Did she spend them with someone she trusted, unaware of the danger? Did she wander the streets alone, looking for shelter? Or was she held captive, her fate sealed long before her body was found? The vanishing and the ominous silence. What makes Elizabeth's disappearance particularly chilling is the silence that followed. In most missing person cases, loved ones raise alarms, employers report absences, or acquaintances notice when someone has vanished. But Elizabeth lived such a transient life that no one noticed right away. She moved too often, had too few connections, and relied on too many passing acquaintances. In a city like Los Angeles, where countless young women arrived each year chasing the dream of stardom, one more vanishing face was easy to overlook. For 6 days, Elizabeth Short was a ghost wandering the streets of Los Angeles, her story known only to her and, perhaps, to the person who would soon take her life. The stage set for horror. Elizabeth's disappearance was not just a tragic accident of fate, it was a reflection of the city itself. Los Angeles promised glamour but offered danger. It drew in dreamers and often left them discarded. For women like Elizabeth, survival depended on navigating a world where men held power, money, and control. On January 15, 1947, her fate would be revealed in the most horrifying way imaginable. But in the days before that discovery, Elizabeth Short was simply missing, her story suspended in silence, her footsteps lost in the sprawl of Los Angeles. No one knew it yet, but her vanishing had already set in motion one of the darkest chapters in American true crime history. Chapter 4: The Gruesome Discovery. The morning of January 15, 1947 began like any other in South Los Angeles. The neighborhood near 39th Street and Norton Avenue was quiet, a patchwork of vacant lots and small, modest homes. The land there was still being developed, and children often played in the open fields while construction crews prepared new housing. That morning, a young mother named Betty Berzinger bundled up her 3-year-old daughter for a walk. The winter sun cast long shadows across the street, and the lot she passed seemed barren, overgrown with weeds. She strolled casually, her child skipping beside her, until something in the distance caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a broken mannequin lying in the grass. But as she moved closer, her heart froze. The body in the lot. The figure before her was not a mannequin at all. It was the body of a young woman, cut cleanly in half at the waist. The body lay just inches from the sidewalk, positioned deliberately as if placed for display. The upper half of the torso was stretched out with arms above the head, almost posed, while the lower half was set neatly about a foot away. The skin was pale, drained of all blood. The face had been mutilated, slashed from the corners of the mouth toward the ears, creating a grotesque Glasgow smile. Berzinger staggered back, clutching her daughter's hand. Her first instinct was to shield the child's eyes and run, but she also knew what she had seen could not be ignored. She fled to a nearby house and called the police. What followed was the beginning of one of the most shocking crime investigations in American history. Police arrived at the scene. When LAPD officers arrived, they were horrified. The brutality of the scene was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Elizabeth Short's body was not only cut in half, it had been carefully washed. There was no trace of blood at the scene, leading investigators to conclude that the body had been killed and drained elsewhere, then transported and arranged in the vacant lot. The medical examiner would later reveal more disturbing details. The separation of the body had been done with surgical precision, suggesting the killer had medical training. Her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her body, almost ritualistic. Bruising indicated that she had been beaten, tortured, and possibly tied down before death. The cuts on her mouth had been inflicted while she was still alive. To the officers standing in that empty lot, it was clear they were not dealing with a typical murder. This was something colder, more calculated, a display of sadism. The crowd gathers. Word spread quickly. Within hours, reporters and curious onlookers crowded the scene. The 1940s was an era when police struggled to control crime scenes, and this case was no exception. Neighbors, journalists, and even children wandered dangerously close, contaminating evidence. Some reports claimed footprints and tire tracks were destroyed before investigators could properly secure them. Photographers snapped pictures of the body, though most newspapers initially withheld the most gruesome images. Still, the sensational nature of the discovery guaranteed headlines. For the city of Los Angeles, already obsessed with stories of crime and scandal, this was a nightmare that seemed pulled from the shadows of Hollywood itself. Identifying the victim. For a short time, the victim was simply Jane Doe number 1. The mutilation and the absence of blood made recognition difficult, but fingerprints taken from the corpse were quickly matched to FBI records. Within 24 hours, the police had a name: Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman with no permanent address. The media wasted no time digging into her background, unearthing photographs that emphasized her striking dark hair and glamorous looks. The newspapers soon coined the name that would make her infamous: the Black Dahlia. Inspired by a then-popular film noir called The Blue Dahlia and her preference for wearing black clothing, the moniker stuck. Overnight, Elizabeth Short became both a victim and a legend. The media frenzy. If the crime itself was horrifying, the media's handling of it amplified the tragedy. Tabloids ran lurid stories filled with speculation and exaggeration. They portrayed Elizabeth as a mysterious femme fatale, a woman of questionable morals who drifted through Los Angeles in search of stardom and wealthy men. One paper claimed she lived a double life, a good girl by day, a seductress by night. Another published unverified rumors about her relationships, painting her as both victim and temptress. In truth, Elizabeth's life had been difficult and unstable, but she was not the dangerous figure the media crafted. Still, once the nickname Black Dahlia appeared in print, the line between fact and fiction blurred. For the public, the case became irresistible, a perfect mix of beauty, horror, and mystery. The autopsy findings. On January 16th, the autopsy report provided more chilling details. The medical examiner confirmed that Elizabeth had been dead for at least 10 hours before her discovery, placing her death in the late hours of January 14th or early January 15th. Cause of death: hemorrhage and shock due to blows to the head and the cutting of her face. The surgical division of the body was carried out between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, again suggesting skill, perhaps from a surgeon or someone with anatomical training. She had also suffered multiple cuts, bruises, and possible restraint marks on her wrists and ankles. The torture she endured before death was brutal and prolonged. The city in shock. The discovery of Elizabeth Short's body sent shockwaves across Los Angeles. The sheer cruelty of the crime made it unlike anything the public had seen before. Even in a city hardened by crime and corruption, the Black Dahlia case was in a category of its own. Parents warned their daughters to be cautious. Rumors spread that a sadistic killer was on the loose, hunting women in Los Angeles. Detectives were pressured to solve the case immediately, yet the sheer brutality of the crime created more questions than answers. The Black Dahlia murder wasn't just a killing. It was a message, though no one could yet decipher what that message meant. The beginning of an obsession. In the days following the discovery, the investigation began in earnest. Detectives scoured the city for witnesses who had seen Elizabeth after she left the Biltmore Hotel. They traced her last known steps, questioned dozens of acquaintances, and followed leads that multiplied by the hour. Meanwhile, newspapers continued to feed the frenzy, ensuring that every detail, no matter how small, became front-page news. The combination of police investigation and media obsession set the stage for one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history. For now, though, Los Angeles was left reeling from the gruesome discovery in that vacant lot. A young woman had been butchered with unimaginable cruelty, her body displayed as if in mockery of life itself. The city would never forget the image. Chapter 5: Media Frenzy and the Black Dahlia Name. When news of Elizabeth Short's gruesome murder reached the press, Los Angeles newspapers wasted no time turning the case into a spectacle. In a city obsessed with Hollywood glamour and scandal, the story had all the ingredients that editors craved: a beautiful young woman, a brutal crime, and an air of mystery. Within 24 hours, the Black Dahlia case had transformed from a police investigation into a nationwide media phenomenon. The nickname is born. It was the Los Angeles Examiner that first gave Elizabeth Short her infamous nickname. Inspired by the recent film noir The Blue Dahlia, starring Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake, and combined with Elizabeth's preference for black clothing and striking dark hair, the press branded her as the Black Dahlia. The name stuck instantly. Unlike her real name, the moniker was mysterious, alluring, and marketable. It gave the story a cinematic quality. This wasn't just another murder. It was a saga worthy of Hollywood. Unfortunately, the nickname also dehumanized Elizabeth. She was no longer a young woman with hopes, dreams, and struggles. She became a character in a crime drama. The tabloid storm. The mid-20th century was a golden age for tabloid journalism, and competition between newspapers was fierce. Reporters didn't simply cover the Black Dahlia case. They exploited it. Front-page headlines screamed lurid details. Dahlia tortured for hours, or sadistic-themed strikes in Los Angeles. Photographs of Elizabeth's face, taken before her death, were splashed across the pages alongside descriptions of her mutilated body. The press also began to craft a narrative about Elizabeth herself, one that was often misleading. She was painted as a femme fatale, a wandering seductress who lured men with her beauty. Stories described her as living a fast life, drinking, and seeking wealthy men to support her. Many of these claims were exaggerated or outright false, but they sold papers. Elizabeth's complicated, troubled life became fodder for public consumption. Instead of sympathy, she was judged, even blamed, for her own murder. Exploiting the family. Perhaps the cruelest twist in the press coverage came at the expense of Elizabeth's family. Reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner used deceptive tactics to manipulate her father, Cleophas Cleo Short. When Elizabeth's body was first identified, Examiner staff contacted Cleo in Massachusetts. But instead of immediately informing him of his daughter's death, they pretended she had won a beauty contest in Los Angeles. They convinced him to share personal details, photographs, and memories, information that would later appear in print. Only after extracting what they wanted did they reveal the truth. His daughter had been murdered in one of the most grotesque crimes in California's history. The betrayal was devastating, but it highlighted the ruthless lengths to which the press would go to secure an exclusive. Hollywood connection. Los Angeles in the 1940s was dominated by Hollywood, and the Black Dahlia case seemed almost scripted for the screen. The crime shared eerie similarities with film noir, dark city streets, a beautiful woman destroyed by unseen forces, and a city haunted by corruption. Reporters began to connect Elizabeth to Hollywood in any way they could. Rumors spread that she had been an aspiring actress, though in reality there was little evidence she pursued acting seriously. Friends recalled she sometimes mentioned Hollywood dreams, but like many young women of the time, these were casual hopes rather than a concrete career path. Still, the press latched onto the narrative. Elizabeth Short became the archetype of the failed Hollywood starlet, drawn to Los Angeles by the allure of fame, only to meet a tragic end. This narrative, though largely fiction, solidified her place in the mythology of Los Angeles. A public gripped by fear and fascination. As headlines filled with graphic details of the crime, public interest skyrocketed. Coffee shops, barbershops, and dinner tables buzzed with conversations about the Black Dahlia. Some were horrified by the sheer brutality of the murder. Others were morbidly fascinated. The combination of beauty and violence made the story irresistible, a macabre tale that blurred the line between tragedy and entertainment. For the LAPD, this public obsession created intense pressure. Detectives worked around the clock, not only to solve the murder, but also to manage the press, who demanded constant updates. Any delay, any lack of progress, was criticized on the front page. The police even used the media strategically, sometimes releasing selective details to provoke the killer or flush out leads. In this way, the investigation and the press became deeply intertwined. The letters and the killer's game. Just as the media storm reached its peak, the case took an even darker turn. On January 24, 1947, the Los Angeles Examiner received a chilling letter. It was a note composed from newspaper clippings, pasted together like something out of a crime novel. The message read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." Enclosed were Elizabeth Short's personal items, including her birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book. All of the items had been carefully cleaned with gasoline, removing any fingerprints. The letter confirmed what many feared. The killer was following the coverage, reading the headlines, and taunting the public through the newspapers. This began a disturbing cat-and-mouse game between the killer, the media, and the police. Each new message stoked the flames of fear and fascination. Media and misrepresentation. The constant barrage of headlines had consequences. Elizabeth Short was reduced to a symbol rather than remembered as a person. Neighbors who knew her were shocked by how the press portrayed her, insisting she had been more vulnerable and hopeful than the papers suggested. But nuance did not sell newspapers. What sold was the image of the Black Dahlia, a mysterious, dangerous beauty consumed by Los Angeles' darkness. This distortion would define how the world remembered her for decades to come. A case bigger than the city. By February 1947, the Black Dahlia murder was no longer just a Los Angeles story. It had gone national. Newspapers from New York to Chicago covered the case, each paper adding their own sensational spin. The image of Elizabeth Short, both victim and myth, appeared in print across the country. Hollywood scriptwriters even began whispering about adapting the case into a movie, though the brutality kept studios from daring to touch it at the time. The case had become more than a murder investigation. It was a cultural phenomenon. And as the weeks passed, with no arrests and no clear answers, the frenzy only deepened. The legacy of the press. The media coverage of the Black Dahlia case shaped everything that followed. It influenced how the public perceived Elizabeth Short, how the investigation unfolded, and how the case would be remembered for decades. The nickname, the lurid headlines, the sensational speculation, these things created a legend that lived beyond the crime itself. Elizabeth Short was no longer simply a victim. She was transformed into a symbol of Los Angeles' darkest side, the shadow lurking beneath Hollywood's glittering lights. And once the media gave her the name, the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short was immortalized, not as the person she truly was, but as the haunting mystery she became. Chapter 6: The Investigation and Suspects. The LAPD launched one of the largest manhunts in its history to solve the Black Dahlia case. Hundreds of detectives were assigned, thousands of tips were followed, and more than 150 suspects were questioned. Yet, despite the sheer scale of the operation, the investigation quickly grew tangled in dead ends and contradictions. The first suspects. Early attention focused on Robert "Red" Manley, the last man confirmed to have seen Elizabeth alive. He had driven her from San Diego to Los Angeles and dropped her at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9, 1947. Manley cooperated fully with police, passed 2 lie detector tests, and was eventually cleared. The investigation then shifted to Elizabeth's personal life. Detectives interviewed dozens of men she had known in Los Angeles, including nightclub owners, actors, and servicemen. The press fueled rumors, suggesting Elizabeth's relationships made her vulnerable. Still, no solid evidence tied any of these men to the murder. George Hodel and the Hollywood connection. Perhaps the most infamous suspect was Dr. George Hodel, a wealthy physician with powerful ties in Los Angeles. Hodel had a dark reputation, marred by accusations of abuse and an affinity for surrealist art tinged with grotesque themes. In 1950, Hodel became a prime suspect after police wiretapped his home. Recordings revealed disturbing comments, including one where he said, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now." Despite this, no charges were brought against him. Evidence was circumstantial, and Hodel fled Los Angeles soon after. Decades later, his son, former LAPD detective Steve Hodel, would reignite the theory of his father's guilt in several books. Mark Hansen and other leads. Another figure investigated was Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who knew Elizabeth. Hansen's home had served as a residence for many aspiring actresses, and Elizabeth had briefly stayed there. While his name appeared in Elizabeth's address book, and he was questioned repeatedly, no direct evidence linked him to the crime. Beyond Hansen, police chased numerous leads involving organized crime figures, Hollywood insiders, and transit drifters. At one point, the department even investigated a man who confessed to the murder, only to discover he was a compulsive liar seeking attention. An investigation under fire. Despite massive effort, the LAPD faced heavy criticism. Accusations of corruption and incompetence plagued the department, with some claiming powerful suspects were protected from scrutiny. By spring 1947, momentum had slowed. Evidence degraded, leads dried up, and the killer seemed to vanish back into the shadows. The case, once the city's top priority, was quietly buried under newer crimes. The Black Dahlia's killer remained elusive, and suspicion would haunt Los Angeles for decades. Chapter 7: Theories, Letters, and Dead Ends. If the brutality of Elizabeth Short's murder wasn't shocking enough, what followed made the case even darker. In the weeks after the discovery of her body, Los Angeles was bombarded with cryptic letters, false confessions, and wild theories that blurred the line between fact and sensationalism. The taunting letters. On January 24, 1947, just 9 days after Elizabeth's body was discovered, the Los Angeles Examiner received a chilling package. Inside were Elizabeth's personal belongings, her birth certificate, social security card, photographs, and an address book. The envelope also contained a note made from cut-out magazine letters, stating, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." A second note soon arrived, reading, "I will give up in Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." The press immediately labeled these as communications from the Black Dahlia Avenger. While fingerprints were found on the letters, they were smudged beyond use. A flood of confessions. Over the years, more than 60 people confessed to the murder. Some were drifters, others were attention seekers, and a few appeared mentally unstable. Every confession fell apart under scrutiny. One man walked into the LAPD claiming he was the killer, but after hours of questioning, it was discovered he hadn't even been in California at the time. Another woman confessed, saying she felt responsible because she had dreamt of the killing. These false confessions wasted valuable resources and only deepened the mystery. Theories about the murder. Several theories have endured through time. Hollywood connections. Some believed Elizabeth was killed by someone within the film industry. The precise cuts on her body led to speculation that a surgeon, or someone with medical training, was responsible. The mafia. Others linked her death to organized crime, suggesting Elizabeth had crossed paths with dangerous people or witnessed something she shouldn't have. Police cover-up. Persistent rumors claimed the LAPD knew more than it admitted. Some conspiracy theorists even argued the case was deliberately buried to protect wealthy suspects. The most famous theory remains tied to Dr. George Hodel, whose medical expertise and sinister personality fit the profile of the killer. His later connection to surrealist artist Man Ray, known for disturbing photographic art, only fueled speculation, dead ends, and frustration. By mid-1947, the investigation was collapsing under the weight of its own chaos. Leads ran cold, suspects were dismissed, and public interest, while still strong, became more about gossip than justice. Detectives admitted they were overwhelmed. With the press turning the crime into a Hollywood-style spectacle, separating truth from fiction became nearly impossible. Every new theory distracted from the original evidence, leaving the case stuck in a maze of dead ends. The Black Dahlia letters stopped as abruptly as they began. Whoever had taunted the police and media seemed to fade into the city's shadows, leaving Los Angeles with nothing but questions and a ghostly silence. Chapter 8: Legacy of Fear and Fascination. The Black Dahlia murder didn't end with Elizabeth Short's death. It grew into something larger, something that continues to haunt Los Angeles and true crime history more than 75 years later. The name that never fades. The nickname, the Black Dahlia, turned Elizabeth into a dark legend. Inspired by the 1946 film The Blue Dahlia and Elizabeth's known fondness for black clothing, the press gave her a name that was both glamorous and sinister. It ensured her murder would never be forgotten, but it also reduced a real woman into a symbol of horror. Even today, many argue the media exploited her. Newspapers exaggerated her personal life, painting her as a femme fatale rather than an innocent victim. This not only sensationalized her murder, but also reflected society's tendency to blame women for their own tragedies. Endless books, films, and theories. Over the decades, the Black Dahlia case became the subject of countless books, TV shows, and films. James Ellroy's novel The Black Dahlia, 1987, turned the case into noir fiction, later adapted into a Hollywood movie. Documentaries continue to revisit the evidence, while podcasts dissect every theory imaginable. Writers and filmmakers are drawn to the case because it has everything: mystery, glamour, brutality, and unanswered questions. Elizabeth Short herself became an icon, not for her life, but for the terrifying way it ended. A case that changed Los Angeles. The murder also changed how the city was seen. Los Angeles in the 1940s was marketed as the Dream Factory, a glamorous paradise built on Hollywood stardust. But Elizabeth's murder ripped away the mask, revealing the corruption, violence, and broken dreams beneath. In a way, the Black Dahlia became a symbol of Los Angeles itself, beautiful on the surface, but dangerous underneath. Why it remains unsolved. Despite the decades, the case remains officially unsolved. 1. Too much media interference. Evidence was compromised by reporters eager for a headline. Overwhelming false leads. More than 60 false confessions buried real clues. Possible corruption. Some believe powerful suspects were protected. The passage of time. With no DNA technology in 1947 and most witnesses long gone, the case is nearly impossible to solve today. Even with modern forensic science, the Black Dahlia files are so tainted that solving it may never be possible. A lasting fascination. What keeps people obsessed with the case is not only the horror of the murder, but also its unanswered nature. Elizabeth Short was a young woman with dreams, swallowed by a city of shadows. Her story transformed into a dark myth. Her ghost lingers in true crime culture, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not fiction, but real. The Black Dahlia murder is more than a crime. It's a legend carved into Los Angeles history, a mystery that refuses to rest.